Oh, pure-hearted one, will you please come and save our world?
No.
Hey fellow gamers, it's BC from Alloy 7 Video with my long overdue category review for Level 5's No Kuni. If you're an RPG fan and still on the fence about picking this up, I believe this review should help you out quite a bit. So let's go with the bottom line up front. For me, No Kuni was a great experience that was greater than the sum of its parts. What makes it so was the fact that Level 5 really nailed the core play by giving the player enough great incentives to quest, level grind, and ultimately make your party stronger. I need to balance that praise with some caution though. If you do not enjoy the older school approach of traditional RPGs that require a large amount of heavy grinding in order to win, you may be disappointed. Also, if you need an excellent combat system to carry you through the tedious grinding, you probably won't find it here. What you will find is a game that gives you enough significant rewards for your efforts through its merit system, thus giving you the desire to continue the grind. Again, if you like grinding in the first place. As you turn in merit cards for completing quests to collect your bounties, you really get the sense of progression and accomplishment. This is truly a completionist's home turf. That said, let's talk about the categories of gamers who will be affected the most by playing No Kuni. Alright, so we're going to set things off with bookworms, and No Kuni is your average, let's go out there and save the world adventure that you've seen many times in RPGs over the years if you've been playing them as long as I have. But I will say that to start things off, I felt that Oliver's mother's death was a bit abrupt and awkward. It happens so quickly, but the story rebounds well and becomes very endearing over time. And there's enough slight twists thrown in, even though I think many of them are predictable, to keep you interested in the narrative overall, even though it's kind of the same story you've seen again and again. But I love how they set up the incentive for Oliver to help his friend Drippy go into Drippy's world to save the world. And his reluctance to be the hero was very practical and well handled, I thought. Much of the story is delivered by making you, the player, read text, and this was a huge letdown for me given the very vibrant and often humorous banter between the well-crafted characters. This game seriously needed more voice acting, and that's not coming from someone who has a problem with having to read text in RPGs. I've been playing RPGs for a very long time, but this game's strength is its characters, and it is their interaction that happens during the voice acting sequences that lose a bit of the oomph when you have to read it in text, especially with Drippy's character, who was my favorite. A lot of his antics are outstanding, but when you have to read them in text, they just don't come across as strongly. Explorers. No Kuni strikes an excellent balance between a large open world and dungeons that are short and to the point, save for the obligatory final dungeon that is by comparison ridiculously long and riddled with multiple boss fights. The world is open enough to allow plenty of exploration without being overwhelming.
Right, what the? Hey!
Strategists. Level 5 attempted to create a hybrid combat system combining standard turn-based battle with the free-roaming movement of games like Star Ocean and the Tales series. What they ended up with was a clumsy mashup that really wasn't necessary. The real-time elements do more to complicate the system than they do to innovate or make it enjoyable. And I know that fast-paced action is all the rage, and navigating static menus in RPGs is now a taboo to developers, but come on, those of us who were willing to seek out No Kuni would clearly not have scoffed at a more traditional system, and it would have served the game much better in my opinion. That's not to say that combat is bad though. It is fast-paced and fun at times if you're leveled properly. It's just more clunky than it needs to be because I believe the devs tried to do too much with it. An example of this in action is the game constantly requiring you to use a defend feature in combat. These situations, which as I said happen often, are little more than time button mashing that becomes more annoying than tactically satisfying over time. Builders will most likely be turned off a bit by No Kuni. There's no character skill tree to speak of. All of the human characters and Pokemon-style familiars learn skills when they reach specific levels. You can augment these familiars using treats to help boost their traits for combat, but it's not much of a consolation for players who want more control over their character development. There's also an alchemy system that's pretty cool, but not really enough to fill the void left by the very basic character development system. Achievers. Achievers will find plenty to satisfy their completionist ways in Ni no Kuni. From filling out merit cards by doing side quests to completing monster bounties to collecting that final platinum trophy, there is plenty to keep you occupied and satisfied here. Visualists. Overall, the visuals in Ni no Kuni are a mix between an absolutely gorgeous art style, but with much of the texturing looking blurred and muted in many locations. I did love the attention to detail in the visual presentation. The animations are gorgeous, and a really nice touch was the fact that when you traverse the world map, it not only has latitude and longitude, but it has altitude. So you actually go over the mountains that you're walking over. Very nice touch. Audio files. I really wish that level 5 would have had the game fully voice acted. One, because the voice actors are excellent, and two, because characters like Drippy and others speak in a way that's not as fun to read in text. Aside from that, the musical score is very classical. It's beautiful, but very different from most JRPGs I've played. If you go in not expecting Final Fantasy VI or a Star Ocean style sound, you should be good to go. Okay, folks, so I want to cover just a few takeaways that I don't believe necessarily fit into the categories before we wrap this up. First of all, save points need to die a horrible death. I understand they're a staple of traditional JRPGs, but come on, they add zero utility. And much of Ni no Kuni, in my opinion, relies too heavily on outdated mechanics, such as the save points, but also the bare bones leveling system. Those two stood out the most. Now, on the positive side of things, there is the typical keep playing after the ending, where you're treated to more secrets, stronger spells, more enemies to fight, dungeons to explore, things of that nature. So that's really cool. Also, Ni no Kuni relies too much on the management of items to survive, even with several hours of grinding. Match that with how hyper expensive the items you need are, and you have a game that will turn off anyone but the hardest of hardcore JRPG fans. I was still in need of a heavy dose of items even in the final battle, especially since you don't get a life spell until you beat the game, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. But again, it didn't fully take away from the total experience, just some things that I thought stood out. Okay, so let's wrap this thing. Ni no Kuni is a very solid JRPG. However, whether or not you should run out and buy it if you haven't already really depends on your taste. If you don't like the more grind-happy JRPGs of the good old days, you probably will lose interest in Ni no Kuni before the final credits roll. I'm an old-school completionist, so I actually dug the game quite a bit. It wasn't enough to knock Tales of Vesperia off its best of this generation pedestal that I have that placed on, but it was definitely worth my $40. So again, I want to thank you guys as always for watching and listening. I want to thank you for liking and subscribing, and I really appreciate it when you guys leave us comments. Let's talk about it. If you've played the game, if you agree or disagree with some of the things I've said, let's hear about it in the comments. And that's going to do it for this video, guys. I will see you on the next one. Allow me to say peace and Godspeed.
Alloy 7.